Good evening and welcome everyone again back to fractalu.com. As you know, tonight's exciting conversation, as you see on the screen, Calling All Angels, Ophanic, Angelic, Enochian, viewed as a machine to catalyze human growth. And leading our conversation tonight is going to be Alan Moore, who has deep skills and experience with Vincent and others in the clairvoyance and the actual technical skill to organize and lead the geometry of the Ophanic ritual from John Dee, Golden Dawn inspired, relating to calling angelic forces, which, as we know, are very large plasma beings and with whom we much need to communicate. And with us here also is Terry Burns. Teresa is here with us and is going to do a bit of an intro as well. Teresa was with us last week. We're so excited because after Teresa's talk about the academic evidence, look, we have an echo here. I'm going to turn this microphone. Yes. After Teresa's talk about the academic evidence that John Dee's hypercube and John Dee's skills and science work were in fact behind a major part of Shakespeare. And for example, that John Dee's hypercube design was inspired the layout of the Shakespearean theater, and the fact that the cube octa geometry there provided a kind of charge implosion called alchemy in Shakespeare. And that was the conversation last time. And there's lots of implications because, of course, the John Dee story then becomes a compelling intro that Shakespeare was about a deep science that we haven't even touched on how deep it is yet. And so I added now that this new author that just emerged last week, his name is Alan Green, and his website is tobeornottobe.org, and the title is Decoding Shakespeare. And basically he spent many years decoding the code within Shakespeare and concludes that in fact it was John Dee, and that there's a deep and powerful message about the geometry of the globe and measure for measure, and another level of deep science. And they've even got the scan of the altar in Shakespeare's grave, proving that the stone of the altar is hollow, and probably Shakespeare's lost plays documents long missing are there, and the proof about the Dee and Shakespeare connection, which would then also document the science of alchemy in addition to the poetry of alchemy in Shakespeare. So anyway, all of that material is together in one place with Teresa's presentation at all the alchemy presentations at fractalfield.com/alchemy. I'm putting the link to Alchemy of Fusion. The link is in here, fractalfield.com/alchemy of fusion. All those lectures are in one place, all the PDFs, and all that new material about decoding Shakespeare. So it's really exciting confirmation, I think. And lastly, then, I just wanted to, before we introduce Teresa and Alan here, I wanted to emphasize why, I as a scientist, and I encourage a scientific view of these things, think it is so critical and important to learn these symmetry operations for communicating with higher plasma beings. We know some people have criticized John Dee for saying, well, you were playing with angels and that's dangerous. But actually, if you don't learn how to steer big tornadoes, in effect, you get struck. You get caught up in the chaos of big tornadoes. So it's urgent that we learn to communicate with the high-level plasma beings, and which is very similar to learning to communicate with ancestors as plasma beings. And just to say a word about that science. So when Alan led this ritual we did, I was present with powerful Ophanim rituals with Vincent at Red Rocks and Sedona. And then Alan led a ritual both here in Perpignan and a powerful one in Torino. And I felt the wind blow. I mean, it was definitely kind of the blow your doors off the church kind of powerful ritual, no question. But the physics, it needs emphasis here, and that is, remember, when waves converge, and remember, Vincent found the hypercube symmetry in the tornado vortex index that was the Ophanim alphabet, and I'm sure Alan's going to talk about that. So when the plasma domains, which are the sacred letters, converge at conjugate angles, they create a centripetal force where pine cones kiss noses, and there you access ancestral memory, the collective unconscious, because they are plasma, and there you access very large interstellar plasma beings, and there the large contexts in which life emerges. So our ability to communicate with these large plasma beings, I view personally as being survival critical for our species. So again, I respect these skills, and I can talk about the science all day, but Alan has the practical skill. So I'm delighted now to introduce Teresa and Alan. Please take it away.
Well, hi. Thanks, Dan.
Yes, thank you. So you wanted Teresa to...
Yeah, so first off, Terry's going to give us an overview of, I'm sure many of you may know where this came from and something about the work of Dee and Kelly, but just in case, it'd probably be a good idea to give a brief overview of how this happened, how we got this material into human consciousness in the first place, and how it led to where we are now. And when we get to the point of where we are now, or real close to that, I'll take over.
Okay, so I'm giving the background and contextual things here. So you should see on here that the Enochian letters. So what I want to do is, hang on here, because we have two different people running a computer and we run it different ways. Okay. All right, so you, what you might notice if you see these letters is it's kind of an unusual alphabet. I'm going to do a quick overview of the history of how people have used angelic, but I want to start with just some of the things that our friend Vincent pointed out in an article called Angels in the DNA, which was in the material for my talk a couple weeks ago. So that alphabet doesn't look like any known alphabet. The titles of it came in 3 groups of 7, so there's 27 characters there spelling 7 different titles. They came in an 8x8 square that's a lot like magic squares. The letters are asymmetrical, so you get a complete group of 21 with 3 variations. Then the letters, the Enochian letters, used to spell out the titles of the letters, and there's no phonetic connection between them. You only use 18 of the 21, and so the 3 that are left over, Vincent would look at them as kind of mother letters, and then the missing or hidden 22nd letter would be like a center point. In any case, and you can read Vincent's article on that, once you form them together in groups of 3, you can map that to the I Ching, and he was interested in looking at the connection between that as DNA. Now, that finally is where all of this leads to. If we know now that our DNA emits a tiny, tiny bit of light, and we know there are now scientific articles out, one in particular that fascinates me, looking at DNA as an antenna, as tiny little antennas, then you start to think about what language is and think about it in a very different kind of way. Okay, so anyway, these are things that to think about. And when I started working with this, you know, Alan had worked with Ophanic, Angelic, Enochian, and they're all 3 names for the same thing. He'd worked with it for years. So these were the kind of questions I was asking him. What is it? How is it informed by higher dimensions? And if you get a temple up and running, he would always tell me, well, it's like a machine, and it, you know, we keep, well, how do you visualize that? Alan's got much better powers of visualization than anyone I've ever known. And then what assumptions are you making about how it catalyzes change? One of the things we did together was work through different magical blinds, and the axioms you start from affect a lot of the argument. Anyway, you know, you all know these 2 guys. This is John Dee and Edward Kelly, and I talked a bit about them a couple of weeks ago. So the Enochian comes through and kind of takes over their communication on their continental trip from England through what is now Poland and into what is now the Czech Republic. And so the background I wanted to give is to talk a little bit about the Pythagorean cosmology that you would assume that Dee would know. Vincent would say that Dee might not have called himself a magician, but have someone who did sacred geometry, that probably the geometric forms around his house in Mortlake were pretty intense. And of course, since Vincent super identified with Edward Kelly, he was drawing on what he felt was a bit of memory, and I would tend to agree with him. So one of the things Dee would have known real well was Pythagorean cosmology. Some of you probably know the idea of the shape of the universe, according to Plato, according to contemporary and Renaissance interpretations, has derived from Pythagoras, yada, 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 is a dodecahedron. What I want you to do is notice this chart a little, because these are forms that Alan uses when he is building, in effect, a geometric structure for a magical ritual. Just a second here. This I want to go to. I want to talk about some basic associations from Plato that it was very clear that Dee knew. First of all, time from Plato's Timaeus would be cycles within cycles that eventually line up with each other. So for Renaissance apocalyptic thinkers, that would connect with an idea of long world ages and certain parts of the Bible, like the book of Daniel, which I'm not exactly too interested in, so I'll skip over. But if you look at that chart, you can see where the quintessence is a icosa in one place and a dodeca in the other. So, and some people argue that the icosa was the great secret of Pythagoras rather than the dodeca. So you need to remember how these solids correspond to each other, and also know a little Greek, and then we'll get to the kind of genius of Dan's star mother. So anyway, the 13th book of Euclid's Elements, and if you remember, Dee did the first English translation of that, it talks about Platonic solids. There's no word ever used for an icosahedron, and there are Greek words for the other four. So, and the icosa has no clear reference, at least in Dee's time, to 3D. So many people have argued that it's the first geometrical object that was formed in the human mind. Now that's what Greek geometers did, and that's certainly something that Dee did. And they're self-duals, right? So the vertices of one correspond to the face in the other, and in Dan's star mother you have one nested in another, nested in another.
You stellate a dodeca and you get an icosa. You stellate an icosa and you get a dodeca.
And so there was even a French geologist whose name it's de Beaumont, I think. Anyway, he considered the form of the Earth represented a kind of deformed dodecahedron. So then you get a Russian geologist who looked at it as a kind of what stabilized the geododeca was that it was inscribed, he felt, into an icosa. Now, that is real interesting to us in terms of some of the things that we've been told while we're working with these. Anyway, so like I said when I was talking a couple weeks ago, Dee, we assume he had no language to express 4 dimensions, but that he used them, and you can tell that from some theorems in the monad. But there were philosophers such as Nicholas Cusa, who is medieval, and there's an anonymous author of the Liber Philosophorum who defined God as an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. Think of that as the torus or the donut, the outside always connecting back to the inside. And that's one of the visualizations we use. By the way, if there's any Thelemites here, you recognize some people attribute that statement to Aleister Crowley. Crowley didn't come up with that. He just knew it from these folks. But by the time that Crowley looks at Enochian, and he's really the first public person after Dee and Kelly, and Dee and Kelly aren't that public, it's just we find their stuff, right? So Crowley is, and that's the beginning of the 20th century, and that's in this work, Liber Henoch. if you're interested in what Crowley does with it, you can Google that and you can find the whole document in many excellent places on the web. So I'm just kind of clicking through it. But notice the axiom that Crowley is using here. He says this is the symbolic representation of the universe. Crowley, of course, he identified as a reincarnation of Kelly. So if that was true, then he is remembering something. So this is the direction, and I'm clicking through that and winding back to the letters now. This is the direction of our studies with Vincent, was to look at how does a language become a symbolic representation of the universe, right? And so we're back here. Well, this is Vincent in Prague, where he was quite happy. Dan wrote the introduction to Vincent's book on the Ophanic, and this is an article from there that I just wanted to draw your attention to because it's hard to find it online. So, well, at that link that Dan put up there, he's talking about waveform alphabets. Here's Vincent's article on a similar topic, and I think their ideas meshed really well. So we're looking at Enochian as the letters as kind of standing waves. That's really different from how many other people look at it. So our axioms are different, and we like them better, by the way. Okay, so I just put that there so you have this handout. And now I'm back to, this is where Sir Edward Kelly lived after John Dee went back to Europe in 1589. And now I am to where my lovely husband is going to take over the class.
Okay, let's see. Let me get some things reorganized. I need to go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Well, we worked for years with Vincent, both as a friend, as a teacher, and as a magical associate. We did a lot of stuff with him. We spent time when we could in Prague with him after he moved to Prague. So that's one of the reasons that we are able to have the perspective on Enochian, what we believe the purposes of it are, or at least certainly some of the purposes for it, the reasons that it was transmitted to us, and so therefore the uses for Enochian. A lot of the real gosh, my vocabulary is escaping me, but some of the most innovative and visionary stuff that Vincent did was in his realizations about what Enochian was representing, what the objects that came through Dee and Kelly, the Enochian furniture, some people call it, really represent, and what they do, what their functions are. And it is rooted in something that Dan talks about a whole lot too, and I think that there was a very, very productive interaction between Dan and Vincent while Vincent was still around that enabled some of these understandings to come about. And that is that what we call magic and what appears to us to be magical events, magical working, the results of doing magic, depend on the manifestation of forms in higher and finer dimensions. So that when we do certain operations, what we're really doing is creating geometric forms in the fourth or fifth or higher dimensions, which have effects that are automatic as they come into being or as they have forms. This also dovetails with some of Leadbeater and Besant's work on thought forms. And the idea that when we think, when we visualize, that we're actually creating objects in a higher or finer dimension, that our thoughts exist in a finer dimensionality or a subtler one. So here, the first thing I was going to talk about was the furniture of the Enochian Hall, the objects that we use when we're working with them, and what they appear to represent, what they appear to do. And the first thing, which was actually one of the last things that Dean Kelly received, is the Great Table of Earth, which we've got here in black and white, which was supposed to represent the entire surface of the Earth in some arcane way, and was a method or a device for receiving lots of different things. The angels that they talked to said that, basically all knowledge could come through this. What we have learned to do since Dean Kelly is to take the four quadrants of this and separate them in space. But you have to see them all together to understand what we believe is really going on. And I'll come back to this shape in just a few minutes. So if I could flip. We've got what we end up with, the four quadrants, and the colors here are the colors that the Order of the Golden Dawn used. I don't think you have to use them, but it certainly helps me subconsciously and intuitively when I'm working with it to have the assistance of the colors. Here's the tablet of the East, which we believe is associated with air. The tablet of the South, associated with fire. The tablet of the West, which is associated with water. And the tablet of North, which we associate with earth. And if you'll notice, we've actually got a pattern that is repeated, because you have on the top left of, say, here's the tablet of Earth. The top left, we've got yellow lettering, air. The top right, blue, which is water. The bottom left, well, we're using green. It could also be white on black for earth. And the red on the bottom right for fire. These are the same, and probably why we ascribed these elemental points to a pentagram. And then at the very top, we have a controlling symbol that is supposed to be the governor of that quadrant, or represent the governor spirit of that quadrant, and then that would represent spirit. So you've got spirit at the top of the pentagram, and you've got air, water, earth, and fire represented on all of them. But you've got that on the Great Table, and on every other subsequent. On the Great Table, you have air, water, fire, and earth. And then where we have spirit is in the center. You see the black cross. The black cross unites all of the tablets. But where does the black cross go when we separate them out into four? Well, that's interesting. In one of John Dee's diary pages, in his magical diary, he has a little box like this. Those are the words from the black cross. And so what we do when we're creating an Enochian machine that we work inside, or an Enochian temple, is to put the four tablets around us, the four quadrants, around us in the appropriate directions. And we put this, which we call the Tablet of Union, which unites them all in the black cross on the Great Table, in the center. And interestingly enough, I learned some things, but on the first time that I charged all of these, it took half of a day to charge the entire Enochian temple and all of the tablets and all of the devices that go with it. And something I noticed was that I started seeing forms like I do when I work magically. I can, if my mind's in the right place, see energy forms, sometimes clearer, sometimes less so clear. And I was noticing that the 4 tablets in the corners and the tablet of union were forming some kind of shape that I couldn't quite focus on. That there was a connection between all of them, even though they were separated in 3-dimensional space, that they were actually all joined. And my assumption was it was joined through the 4th direction we can't see very well, or through 4D. And I saw a flow that was happening with all of them. So I'll get into what we do with them after that, but I wanted to introduce the idea that what we believe is going on here with all of these flat tablets. Why are these flat tablets actually doing anything? And that is because if you observe it with a higher aspect of vision, what you see is that there are these shapes that form out of this 2D representation. So what some of us, Vincent and I and Terry and a few other people who worked with it this way, believe is that by being arranged in these 2-dimensional formats, that what is happening is through these shapes, through their juxtaposition, and through the energy forms that these letters represent, we're actually getting 4D and perhaps higher forms or shapes being generated out of these 2-dimensional tablets.
And Alan, we might, just to encourage the scientists here to visualize even greatest rigor, that remember that Vincent saw the arrangement of these letters in the great tablet as basically the layout of a hypercube, and then, which is basically how you embed a tetracube into a dodeca, which is to say, when Alan says, higher dimensions, he means more superposed axes of spin symmetry, which means more spin density and more harmonics of charge. And then further, then Darlene saw that each letter was basically a shadow of a different part of a vortex or a tornado. So basically what you're learning to do is throw plasma donut tornadoes around at very particular angles. And remember, that's exactly what we do between the tubes of the Therify, and we create this amazing centripetal life-giving plasma wind. So this is a real science about shaping these large plasma beings and calling their centering force. So anyway, I just see the science fits nicely what Alan is saying, that's all.
Thanks, Dan. I'm usually remembering that is so, but since I'm focusing slightly differently, thanks for that explanation. Because what I observe is that we get these charged properly. There's a whole process you go through to charge them and get them running. And then when you arrange them in 3 dimensions properly, there is an effect that happens automatically. It's like this machine starts operating. You can see energy flows happening, sometimes out of the corner of your eye. Sometimes if you've been cranked up a bit in charge yourself enough, you can actually see the flow. It looks like lines of light to me sometimes. So
remember, the CH in machine from the Hebrew hak means access to a black hole, as in Shem. So machine in this sense is really a device for accessing black holes, which it has much more living sense to it.
Now, what Vincent used to joke about, actually, it was a wonderful way of kind of explaining in story form the whole Dean Kelly Enochian experience. Is he said it's like in Gilligan's Island when you had the people stranded on the island, the scientist there, the professor, wanted to create some way to communicate. So he got coconuts and a bunch of other different things, and he built a radio, supposedly. Yeah. He had a coconut radio, as Vincent would say gleefully. And he said, that's the metaphor for what these higher intelligence beings that we're calling the Ophanim may have been doing, and we think they probably were, when they transmitted all of these details of this Enochian system, is they were teaching us to build a coconut radio, so to speak, so that we could talk to them, or so that they could connect with us, we could connect with them, they could connect with us, and they could communicate things to us. What we found is it doesn't mean we're actually talking to them in words, although on occasion something like that happens. It means that suddenly there are downloads of concepts and energy streams happening. Once you've got one of these Enochian temples, as we call it, which I think of as a device or a machine, set up and running, you've got an almost continual download of information that you can access, or concepts, and of energies that you can tap into. And these energies are catalytic, which is why we believe that part of the purpose of this is to catalyze the evolution of our own consciousness. And Vincent was very excited when he made the connection between the way the angelic letters were received. There was a basic 64 square grid. And one of the things that he and the people he was working with saw was that these seemed to have direct correspondences to the codons of DNA, among other things, the trigrams of the I Ching, and who knows what else. But
and the amazing thing too is that Alan, this is what Teresa and I admire so much, Alan clearly is actually able to see these charge fields develop.
When my mind gets expanded enough, and we'll get into one way we do that, I can see things moving and flowing and operating and interacting. And you can also feel things happening internally. Now, what's happening? Well, we're not really quite sure because it's not on the level of our everyday consciousness. But some of the things that Vincent and others have discovered seems to indicate that what we're getting is a response on the level of DNA. And when you work with this, things change. You start being able to put two and two together in a way that you couldn't before. Things are catalyzed in the mind. Sometimes below the level of consciousness, we start pushing up against our own internal boundaries, which is why you need everything. You need what we call magical hygiene. You need to have the space clear of negative influences or destructive thought forms, and that can be internal or external, because it will get wonky. And I've noticed, in the past, people have written about experiences that they've had with Enochian, and some people have not had very good ones. That they start getting a little crazy. And after having seen what this does when you've got it put together, what we feel is as right as we can get it up to this point, as correctly as we can get it, with corrections to some of the blinds that Terry inferred or implied, and the right way to look at the working of it, that it is creating some pretty intense effects within and without. And if it was wonky in any way, if it was out of sync, if it was running in the wrong way, I could see that people would start to get, get a few screws loose after a while, if you might say it. But I don't want to focus on that too much. It's just make sure you've got good ritual hygiene, you're good and clear, and if you work with Enochian, make sure that your own mind space is good, that you've been meditating, you've been clearing out all the stuff that's bothering you as much as possible, so that you're not focusing on anything that you don't want to energize when you're working. And that's true
about astral hygiene. Astral hygiene is sometimes called, the circle of intent, that says nothing enters this circle that doesn't have pure intent. It's how the ancestors guarded when they went into trance to invoke the ancestral memory they had. astral hygiene. So it's a very similar to magical hygiene.
We've seen a couple questions pop up there, and maybe if we have time to talk about those at the end, but just quickly to the one about Noah and the sons of Enoch and steering the ark. That's fascinating. I'm sure that Dee had a copy of the Slavonic Enoch. Now, I mean, some historians wouldn't agree with me. Most of them probably. What else is new? But that's a whole huge side discussion. But among that was the whole Nephilim and the daughters of men. It is in much more detail in the Slavonic Enoch, where you in effect have a reverse Adam and Eve story, sort of like the Book of Inanna, if some of you know that. And then to jump down to Dan Kaplan's comment about they have this information to begin to inscribe the way to reprogram our own DNA. Mm-hmm. Well, junk DNA is not junk, and one of the things that Alan told me when I was looking at characteristics of languages, sign and symbols, and in what way this is a language and not, is that, energy symbols like crop circles, as many of you well know, I mean, all right, that's a two-dimensional shadow of energy waves that are doing something. And you can think of some of the earliest sacred alphabets as they maybe become used as an alphabet later. That's probably not even what their original purpose was. But now
well, that actually reminds me of a few things. But so actually, I think the DNA, as Dan Kaplan said here, I think the effect it has on the DNA is probably a very critical part of the purpose of those who sent this system to us. That's just an opinion, of course. But from the effect that it's had on me and some other people, I think that's probably very well taken. Now, where was I? To get back to...
I mean, it's obvious that DNA is the most phase conjugate implosive plasma system we have at a molecular level, and all other systems are a way of reaching to that point. So, at a cellular level and a macromolecular level, DNA is the most implosive symmetry we have. And we're imitating that now on a macro level, and it will eventually get us there. So it's obvious that DNA would be a climax form of this.
Well, it will also make sense that if there are these higher or more sophisticated consciousnesses that wanted to get through to us and help us through an especially difficult point of our evolution, that they might try to give us something that would enable them and us to communicate on that level of DNA, and for information to be exchanged or things to be energized or catalyzed. And it certainly has a feeling to me when I work with the system that is part of what's happening.
Well said.
So, you were saying?
Well said. Well said. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So let me see where this is going. So we've got the tablets. We're going to have them in the 4 cardinal directions around us. We have an altar in the middle that has the tablet of union on it, but there's some other things going on as well. Actually, the first thing that you charge and the first things that came through to Dee and Kelly were the seal of truth, which we have here, Sigillum Dei Amet, which, according to some sources, was basically the summation of all known planetary knowledge, esoterica or magic, up to Dee's time. You look at it as a flat piece, but if you work at it for a while, it does something similar to what the Shri Yantra does. When you look at it long enough, is that it becomes three-dimensional. And you have planetary attributions of all the 7 original understood planets, the alchemical planets, including, of course, the sun and the moon.
You can use a pointer to point to.
Yeah, okay, like, is the pointer moving around properly? Okay. So we've got the moon in the center. And then on the very, very outside, you've got all the different planets spiraling in to the center. So what this is used for, I mean, there's more to it, but its primary purpose in terms of Enochian ritual is it is a filter of the seal of truth. This is the top side, which has all of the attributions that we activate or charge before we use it. And then on the flip side, we have this. And what we seem to have is between the two, a filter that makes sure that what we receive is clean. It's a truth filter, basically. So you want that running before you do anything else.
Just to say that there's lots of physics to the sigil of truth, that the 5 spins inside, obviously, are the pent symmetries, dodecikos, which then contains the 7 spins of the tetracube, which is also exactly the way the Anu is constructed. And literally, DNA has 5 axes of spin symmetry in the thread inside, and then 7 superposed axes of spin symmetry of the tetra, as the braid on the braid superposes 7 times on the outside. So in each case, the Anu, heart of the sun, heart of the human, heart of the hydrogen, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. And by the way, we then showed this to the Cherokee, and that's exactly what they were taught by the Adawi. So this has lots of good physics, just to say.
So Joseph has a comment about the letters on there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can get to that when we look at magical blinds, because one of the things you will find that were built into all of these on Dee's original manuscripts were either errors or errors of interpretation. So we'll come back to the letters on there and what they can be used for.
Yeah. So the first thing that I do when I was setting up an Enochian space or an Enochian temple is to charge this seal. You go in and you charge all the names on it. Some of them can be pronounced, some of them cannot. And make sure that you're focusing properly. And I noticed the first time I charged it with that intent is that when I got it finished, I got down to the center and charged the center. Suddenly, there was what appeared to be a sphere, that this was a flat plane through bisecting a sphere. The sphere appeared to be moving or rotating, and I heard something like a roaring sound in my ears. I said, my goodness, this is a machine. This is a device on some finer level. And I kept seeing that kind of phenomenon as I charged more and more things.
But in the physics, we always say we phase conjugate precisely down to the Planck sphere. But Alan, do you want to just say a little bit more what you mean by charging?
Okay, well, sure. And I would like to answer Jill says a question here about the Shri Yantra. If you're familiar with that particular shape, it's a mandala or a meditation shape used in Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism. That looks like a bunch of different triangles, but the monks say that when you work with it long enough, that not only at first it will deepen out into a 3-dimensional form. You can see that it's just a flat representation and has 3 dimensions within it. But they say if you work with it long enough, you start seeing 4 dimensions. I've only been able to see 3, but I've heard that you can see 4. And what I was comparing the seal of truth here to that, saying that yes, it's a flat representation of something that exists in more dimensions.
We did animate the Sri Yantra in 3D there at that link, 9 interdigitated golden ratio tetra, and the physics of that as a plasma device is the movie Last Mimsy, and that I'll put a link to that as well. So it fits perfectly.
Okay, so what were you recommending, Dan? Now my mind is.
Oh yeah, just to try to be specific, a little more specific about what you mean by charging here. That when you charge, yeah.
Okay, what we do to charge these, it's kind of mundane sounding, but using a principle that many of us in ceremonial magic, especially some of those with Golden Dawn or Thelemic backgrounds, is we vibrate. You chant the name, and it's not, you don't have to make a melody out of it. You just chant the name so that it creates a vibration and the column of air in your body. So it comes from the mind, but then it inhabits your three-dimensional space, so it connects your body to what you're visualizing. So you vibrate the names, and I usually send energy from my fingertips or palm chakras or whatever works into the object itself as I'm doing so. You vibrate the names, you send energy to them, and you visualize this happening.
You could use the red pointer to point at them and give an example.
So for an example, let's see. Right here I would be visualizing this in my mind, and the planet that it's connected with, which I'm not thinking clearly of right now. And you would chant or vibrate, create a nice auditory vibration as you send energy towards it. And what the effect this has is that particular principle, and whatever that principle connects to, then is activated within this shape or tool. And we do that with everything on it. Some of the things are silent names, they're unpronounceable, so we don't pronounce them, but we visualize them. Like these here that have letters, but also numbers and other things in them that we can't quite vibrate. So we visualize those and send energy. We vibrate all of the other names. And we do it in a specific order. And this you do not only with the seal of truth, but you will do it with the holy table, the names all the way around the perimeter, and the names in the center in each direction, vertically and horizontally. You do it with the tablets in a particular order that emphasizes the higher processes that we consider to be connected to spirit, and then the denser processes that or energies or even beings that are connected with the elements within, like air of earth, water of earth, fire of earth, earth of earth. So we will vibrate those as we direct energy, and we'll charge them. And so first we do the seal of truth, and I get this rotating sphere with this kind of roaring sound. And then we do the holy table, which this represents the wooden top of the wooden table that Dean Kelly used, and I place it on a wooden altar in the center of the space I'm using. And what I noticed was when I vibrated these, this popped out into a shape. I started seeing a shape, like a cube, and a cube, and a cube, and a cube. And these did the same thing. So what you ended up with was something like a hypercube. Excuse me. And what I observed from that point on was that when you've got the seal of truth and you put it on top of this, you also have small seals of truth on below the legs. Make sure that the whole thing is filtered well. Once you create this, you have a framework. It's like a structure of girders in finer energies, a structure of lines that then everything else connects to and hangs on. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we've got flat shapes, and this is all through the Enochian furniture. We have flat two-dimensional shapes that encode within them multi-dimensional forms. That when you get the thing charged properly, those forms expand out of it. At least that's what I observed occurring. And you get these sound effects as well. These we got high-pitched. It's almost like some people, it reminds me some people would talk about the music of the spheres. Well, there's something like that that happens when these things are charged and activated. So you get this in the center that expands out. So you've got this structure that everything kind of connects to and hangs on. Then you go around, after you've got this charged, you charge the tablets. And the tablets expand out into multidimensional forms and connect to this. So you've got some, and then when you've done all 4 of the elemental tablets, you charge or energize the tablet of union, which then goes on top of the seal of truth, on top of the holy table. And then everything folds up. It's like you've got this massive multidimensional form. So the tablet of union appears to connect both from within and without at the same time. The corners of each of the elemental tablets seem to be drawn in and connected with each other through whatever is happening with a tablet of union. So it connects all of them like the black cross connects the flat table, as I was talking about before. If we can get back to it quickly. Let's see. Where?
Just go back.
Okay. Point. No. That. There we go. So the black cross in the middle that unites them when they're in 2 dimensions becomes the tablet of union in the middle of a multidimensional shape that connects all of them.
And when you say, Alan, that everything kind of folds up, it could be a metaphor also for everything implodes. You know, the compression is perfect.
Sure. It just, I have no doubt that when I'm seeing things that are occurring multidimensionally or in finer or subtler realms, that my mind is interpreting them so that I can relate to it. So I'll see things sort of 3-dimensionally, but I know that this couldn't happen in 3 dimensions. It's got to be more than 3 dimensions. You've got another, as Dan says, another axis of spin that's being invoked. So then there are other components. This is the lamen that the practitioner wears to connect her or himself with the holy table. And there are elements of the holy table within it. There's this complex formula you go through from the original square of letters that you derive the holy table from, that was from the notes that John Dee took. You also derive this from it in a different series of transformations. So when you're wearing this on your body, it is also charged in the same way we described. Then what you're doing is creating a physical link between yourself and the holy table and everything the holy table is connected to. So the idea there is that you become a part, in a sense, a resonant part of the device that you are in the process of assembling. So we have the lamen, and then there's one of the last things that they got was what people call the seal of Nalvaj. There was the angel Nalvaj dictated a lot of this. This one they call Nalvaj. It doesn't have to have the wood grain in it or anything like that. I just thought that, well, that makes it look a lot like the holy table. We'll make a nice system out of it. What's important are the letters and the arrangement of the letters. 1 week before Vincent moved permanently to Prague, he had Terry and I visit him every day. And he had us do a project where he got these original tables of letters that Dee made notes of from the angelic scrying sessions, and had us cut them apart and fold them and stick them together in different ways to show us how they transformed from the original grid that Dee got into some of these different forms. And this one was one of the most complex. He had us cut this into pieces and then reconnect it in all these different configurations. And he finally convinced both of us of his hypothesis, or which was that what this does is generates a 24 cell, which is, to my mind, an extremely complex shape, although you can get a lot more complicated than that if you go into finer dimensional geometry. But a 24 cell is 24 different chambers, the walls of which, or the planes of which, are octahedra. And even though if you looked at it from the outside with your three-dimensional eyes, what you would see was an octahedron, you have this extraordinarily complex shape or form within that. This, interestingly enough, will generate something that when I've looked at it from several different angles, when my mind was altered enough from having worked with this stuff, that I agreed that it was generating something that the best I could tell was probably a 24 cell. I'll get to that later. But let me see if I can find, I have a 24 cell here somewhere. Okay. This is a line drawing of a two-dimensional slice of a 24 cell looking down at it. And you can see that these are probably the tops of octahedra. But actually everything in there it's just in 3D, you have to distort everything to connect them. In 4D, you don't. And I wish I could animate this. There's this wonderful animation off the web that shows this is another way of looking at a 24 cell and shows it rotating about the fourth axis of spin and all the different shapes that come about within it. It's wonderful.
If you rotate an octa with respect to the right tilt angle 32 degrees and blink it 5 times, you have ecosa. So, octa rotated to the next dimension embeds in ecosa, which is, and I thought also there was a truth that in the tablet of Nalvaj you could actually read down the names of the various angels as well.
Yes, that's how you charge it, or that's how you activate it. And you have to read them in every direction because it's deeply, densely encoded. That's the point of some of these things, is they look simple and they're not. They're very densely encoded. It's fairly clear if you work with it in this way long enough, you come to the inescapable conclusion that this system was encoded and transmitted from a very sophisticated level of consciousness, one probably beyond human consciousness.
This may be how magic squares originally got their name.
Yeah, there we go. So this is kind of, in a way, if you were looking at it, with some very good clairvoyant vision, sort of what you'd see after the tablet of Nalvaj was charged and suspended in the right place. Actually, Vincent figured out that probably the best place to put it was suspended over the holy table, even with the center of the 4 elemental tablets. He used to call the tablet of Nalvaj the Emerald Modem. Yeah, because when he started activating and using these systems, when they did the whole system with all of the angelic calls, once everything was set up and charged, that it seemed to function as a communication device, and that Nalvaj in the center appeared to function like a modem in a computer, or your broadband router now does. That what you've got is this extraordinarily sophisticated coconut radio, as Vincent used to say. I found that cute. So what we do is we have a tripod that we suspend the tablet of Nalvaj over the altar, and it's not perfect. I'd like to get it suspended probably by fishing line or something from the corners of the room to where we can, let me see, here we go. Yeah, there we go. So it won't be in the way of anything, but it's suspended in exactly the right place. And there's a little bit of apparently wiggle room in terms of positioning if you get the energies going right, because of course what these are doing, it's like shining a light into a hologram. When you shine a laser into a hologram, the image pops up that appears to be external to the plate of the hologram that it's projected.
Well, and that metaphor becomes very rich, because if you make a hologram of a mirror and a magnifying glass, the mirror and the magnifying glass will reflect and magnify other items inside the hologram, but not items outside the hologram. But there's a way to make the mirror and magnifying glass in the hologram actually reflect and magnify items outside the hologram. This is real physics, and that difference is phase discipline, and that's actually the situation that Enochian sets up. It's a very deep and wonderful metaphor.
Yeah, so that's, I thought of that as a way to explain kind of what it appears is happening, is that these different flat tablets, when they're charged, become like holograms, and it's like you're shining, when you charge them, you're shining the laser through it, and you're getting this projection, this very rich multi-dimensional projection coming out of it. But if you take the axiom that these projections are actually real things existing in a multi-dimensional framework, then what you see is this whole thing, when it's put upright, it's amazingly portable. It's all flat. Then you take it apart, you put it up, you charge everything or you activate everything, and this multi-dimensional machine takes form that starts automatically doing whatever it's supposed to do, whatever it does. Now, what we do when this gets us to the next phase of what I was going to talk about. I wonder if the sophisticated thoughts concept forms with normal letters. Well, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I do know that these are not normal letters. They are also in flat encoding of energy forms, vortices, tubes or vortexes of energy. And therefore, each one of these actually has its own energetic effects. When you vibrate the sound and visualize the shape, you actually get this cascade of energy that seems to not only have an external effect, but an internal effect. That's where we think it's probably communicating in some way or another with our own internal DNA.
Do you need to talk about that? Just to talk about the magical blinds for this later? Okay.
Possibly.
Okay.
But
see, I don't think it would work with the English alphabet the way we use it for.
Okay, go ahead and if you'd like to say something about that.
Well, one of the things you're looking at, if you think about these as a waveform, is to go back to what Alan was saying about the holy table. Okay, so if you have the seal of Amet as a condensation of planetary magic, and there's not any Enochian letters on here, right? These are English representations of things that would be written in Hebrew, but he didn't write them in Hebrew. Okay, Hebrew, when you're casting forms like a ritual of the pentagram, if you think Adonai, you see those Hebrew letters kind of hanging there. And as a sacred alphabet, those have certain standing wave functions, as Dan has talked about a lot. And those map to a cube. Okay, if this maps to a hypercube, okay, so you have the seal of truth, which is English representations of Hebrew letters, and that's what magicians would generally use. Now you have a hypercube here, and as Alan said, this is like the sort of girders. What you have with the Enochian after that is a higher dimensional concepts connected with these letters, but nothing like that exists with the English letters the way we had them. They might with Greek letters, and then Greek like Hebrew,
possibly with Sanskrit if we knew more about Sanskrit.
But even by the time you get to Latin, which is supposed to be a sacred language, these kind of correspondences really start to break down
and that's
badly.
in English. That's what we're using is the Roman alphabet.
Yeah, and we could say, since we did map the spiral on the torus indexed by the symmetry of tetracube precisely to Hebrew and Sanskrit, that was a tetracubic symmetry index for plasma donuts, quite literally. And if Ophanim Enochian is the superset hypercubic, which is the higher order spin, Ophanim means whirling ones, that fits this metaphor perfectly, that it's literal plasma physics for setting up superpose axes of spin to implode charge.
And one way that we worked our way through this system was you find glitches where things don't match, and the way you solve it is with individual letters to make it so that the letters match the shapes that you're visualizing.
Yeah, and we also went back to the original source, these diaries, and the squares or rectangles, the grids of lettering that these were all derived from. And then we went through the transformations that they direct him to go through to get these shapes, and found out there were discrepancies, just a few small ones. But you see, there's a letter right here. That's the Enochian letter for E. And Casaubon, who's where one of our first recordings of all of this Enochian stuff was a fellow who came after the day of Dee and Kelly, and Eric Casaubon, and he was trying to, basically disprove all of this and say, oh, well, this is how they were diluted. But he made a lot of errors in his transcriptions, or either his printer did, and we don't know which it is. Actually,
it's both, but I'll can.
So, for an example, this was the letter for I or Y, not E. So there were small corrections like that where we made. There were some of them, a few of them in the elemental tablets. There was that one here in the Holy Table and a couple of other places. And there was an error on the Seal of Truth that.
Well, this might be a good place for me to
talk about that.
So the thing is, this works a lot better when you understand why it's working. And some of these, we don't know if Dee knew or not, but some we're pretty sure that he did know. So here was a question that we've asked each other a fair amount. If you solve a problem through insight, it's how does it expand your consciousness? If you've all had one of these aha experiences, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I get it. It's not this, but it's that. Well, and even if you're working with the kind of geometry you had in high school, if you remember, you had to do these proofs, but they're based on axioms. If you start with the wrong axioms, you get nothing. Okay, so many people working through things from Dee's manuscripts have found these moments. Now, some Dee is putting in intentionally, and some not, and some were introduced by this guy Casaubon, and then some modern magicians thought that Casaubon had just made a mistake when Casaubon hadn't made a mistake, because neither of them knew what they were talking about. Really, I'm not trying to be a snob, but it's okay. So this was an article that Alan and I looked at that where we were talking about magical blinds. So the easiest one of these to understand is on the Seal of Amet. So I'm going to go back to that real quickly. But if you want to know more about it, it's in that article. But I think it's just the idea that is the most important. Okay, so if you're looking at the Seal of Amet, you see what's going around the outside of it there. Okay, so those are going to correspond to Hebrew, like I said. Now, Dee had collected Hebrew grammars. He knew Hebrew really well. And if you go around the outside of that...
Yeah, we can point that out.
Yeah, but I can't do two things at the same time. Okay, yeah, these things. See these correspondences here? Okay, if you put these together to see what they spell in Hebrew, and you go around, then like you have this whole like theatrical narrative in what Dee is doing, that this little angel comes forward and reveals right before the Y15 this character, which is an Og, then another angel comes forward and does something. Okay, you translate it. If you go all the way around, you get the image of death with gematria, which makes no sense. So to shorten something that would take a long time to explain, I'm just going to read something from Clay Holden, who figured this out. He says, if you go around and subtract the numbers at the top and bottom of the letters around the outer ring of the seal, having corrected the Y15, which is this weird mistake that Dee makes.
It was Y14 in what
it was
he left.
Y14, and it's really that way on his seal in the British Museum, but you don't use that outer ring for anything at all magically. It's like, it's just there. So it's supposed to be, like Alan said, Y14, and you get Y15.
No, you get Y14,
15.
but it's supposed to be Y15.
Yeah, that's right.
It's Clay Holden that figured
Yeah.
that one out.
So you do that, you get 440. So you add the one in the concentric circle, and then you get the value in gematria of Ameth, or truth. And without it, you get Met, or death. I mean, that's a very complicated way to put in a blind.
Right.
So, okay, that's just in one of these.
I was going to point that out.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to show where that is.
Oh, that
if you zoom in here, and it's a very small thing. You see this Y15? Well, that was Y14 on D's sigil. But when you go through the whole process Terry was talking about, then what you get is the message of death.
Mm-hmm.
If you change it to Y15, the gematria changes and it becomes what the seal is supposed to be in the first place, Amet, or truth. And it made a huge difference when we made that change in it. And I put together the seal that had it that way. We had tried to activate it before and it didn't work. I didn't get the rolling sphere effect that I told you about. When we changed it to Y15, suddenly the thing came alive.
And so that, if you don't understand why the things are here, they don't work as well. Now, it doesn't mean that people weren't using them. And there are others, many of them, like, now with the Holy Table, Cassabaum had Dee's original and printed it. But modern magicians didn't really know why things were in a certain order. So they looked then at Dee's original and said, oh, there's a printer's error. Well, there wasn't a printer's error. And we asked Vincent about that, and he said, well, I figured it out and it works fine. I don't think there's a printer's error. So we went back to Dee's manuscripts and figured out, no, Cassabaum has copied Dee's thing right. He doesn't know why it works, but he's got it right. And if you understand what Dee is doing, which was he was changing his perspective like a person moving around the room, then this one is right. And there are others that I won't go into and explain, but say the governors. Did you want to? That was the huge one.
We had to go through the whole set of governors in the tablets. We don't have any drawings about that. So
well, I can. It's on this one that Alan has called up before. The outside part of these, there are things that are governors, and Vincent said, well, the governors are what governs the tablets, because there are some tablets like up through the Golden Dawn that would have 2 letters in here because no one knew what went with what was supposed to go there, because you have multiple diagrams of D's. But you can tell the way Dee is drawing it that there's some principle there that you're missing. It's like there's an axiom, you don't know what it is, and if it's, oh, the governors govern the tablets. So if there's a conflict, you go to the governor. Then what you get is the outside of it here will connect to the inside, like as within, so without, or you get this torus where the furthest most parts connect back to the Black Cross or Tablet of Union, and there you are, the practitioner in the middle. And just by the way, Vincent told us this, but we noticed his weren't corrected. We didn't really know why. We corrected ours, and then our friends in Italy, who Dan knows, they corrected the tablets and sent us a copy of theirs, and we both corrected them the same way because we knew the principle.
There are in these diaries diagrams of these tablets, but instead of being arranged in this way, they have shapes on them, linear shapes that will have an arrow. So we go, you could go from here down and over. And what those were what we were calling it. They called them the planetary governors, and supposedly each one represented an area on the face of the Earth, although nobody yet's figured totally out where they might be. But they appear to be the underlying principle behind the lettering of the tablets. So if you go in painstakingly, which we did for one of the articles we put on the web, took us quite a while, and you make basically you set up as arrays all of the governors, where they are, and what their letters are. And then you map them out on the tablets.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look to see where the discrepancies are, and we found there weren't very many,
No.
but there were a few. We had like four or so letters
And if you remember,
that we had to change.
they were all, and what was really cool, it was just what they were all right on the outside, not in a row, but different places on the outside. And when you changed them, they would connect to the inside. And we were just like, look at this.
For example, if I might say,
please.
sorry, here's the three holy secret names of God, as the Golden Dawn called, the center line. And this is in the Tablet of Water or the Tablet of the West. As we pronounce it, we use one system of pronunciation because we don't really think, it doesn't seem to matter as much how it's pronounced as it is what your intent is when you're doing it. Because it seems to be an energetic language, not necessarily a spoken language. But we pronounce it letter by letter. So this would be Mpehe, Arasela, Gai. Now, if you know the original ones, this is going to be weird. Ka, He. In actually, this in the original was OL.
Mm-hmm.
But we compared, what we found was in the governor that was in just this area, the letters had to match. It had to be CH, not OL. So we did that for all of the tablets. We found about 4 errors, very small ones. We changed them. And I found that when we charged or activated the tablets, we got a much more powerful response.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to make a huge difference, much larger than you would think a couple or 4 or 8 letters would make. So that's when Terry was talking about. It looks like the process you have to go through to solve these blinds or errors or whatever they are seems to be a process that part of an alchemical process that expands your own awareness as you do it.
And the last on that, Darcy's comment about what do the seal using Enochian? No, and that's a great question. But if you understand, it was derived from Hebrew, and planetary magic tended to be in Hebrew or some other sacred language. But Hebrew maps to a cube and to 3 dimensions, and your physical body is 3-dimensional. So you, the practitioner, in the middle place here, in your body, Vincent liked to call it a meat sack, but anyway, you are trying to have these larger forms implode into that space. So that's why the filter is Hebrew, and then you kind of move.
Well, the idea here is that to put it in another way, but the same thing, is that Hebrew is the structure or framework you start with that you expand out from. First, we start with the 3-dimensional reality that we inhabit and that we're most familiar with. And so you charge and energize using that. And that'll get into, I haven't gotten into our method of creating the sacred space within which to work with the system.
Move right along, Ellen, because time is going by here. Please proceed.
I see. So the Hebrew is part of what you do to bring your own body in sync and to a higher level. Then the Enochian goes out from there and goes into what would be new territory. It's not the familiar, but it is the more celestial is another word you can possibly use. Celestial, angelic, Enochian, whatever. The 4th dimensional and beyond. So I'll go right along. I'll get right ahead then, if I can. Let's see.
And
where
it does say what they're saying, that we've clearly mapped Hebrew and Sanskrit to tetracubic. It's that linked DNA ring. And by the way, the tetracubic symmetry map also mapped the ancient Rovash Irash Old Hungarian, which is Ugaric, which is the Draco alphabet. And so if Vincent was right that the hypercube was a superset, and literally Ophanim Enochian was the next order of spin, so it fits the metaphor that Alan's developing.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting what I was trying to say. Sometimes words fail me. Dan is superb with these kind of explanations. It's wonderful. Thanks, Dan. So this is a write-up that we have on the web of one of my principal methods, and it's something I learned from time spent in the Golden Dawn. I was a Hierophant in the Golden Dawn Temple for quite a while, and learned a lot of their ways, and then we realized the limitations that they had, and moved on and applied our innovations, but used as a kind of a foundation some of the techniques that they use. So there is a thing called the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram, which is elaborated into a watchtower. That's the basic energizing working that I use to put us in synchronization with the Enochian space that we're in. And it fits very well. Dan's been there when we've done this. That it requires actually, we believe, well, from our experience, some preparation before you can interface well with what the Enochian device, machine, or temple is already doing. So what we do is we do a stack, as Vincent would call it. We do a lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram to get things started, invoking the elemental, the directions in each of the elements in each of the directions. And we'll do a middle pillar forming a pillar of light within us. This connects to Hebrew, and we're using Hebrew vibrations there. So we're creating this Hebrew cube of space, and lighting up energy points within ourselves that connect to one way of viewing the Kabbalistic tree of life. So that brings our own energy, starts bringing it up. And then you start working with you interface with the Enochian by doing the Supreme Invoking ritual in each of the directions. So here it shows some of the pentagrams that we do and the vibrations that we do.
The pentagram drawings.
Yeah, I know. So here, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll go to the one that we've got all of the drawings at once somewhere here. Here we go. Okay, so these are in the invoking. If you see, and this relates to the Enochian tablets again as well. Spirit at the top, fire at the bottom right, air at the top left, water at the top right, earth at the bottom left. And so you go in the direction of each of the elements in order to invoke. So we do these. We've already got 4 pentagrams or pentagons from the lesser invoking ritual. And then you do 1 spirit pentagram and 1 of the elemental ones in each direction, so you've got 8 more. And what all around us. What we've discovered at that point is that the 8 pentagrams, the 8 and the others, you have 12 pentagrams, and they self-organize into a dodecahedron. That's I've observed happening around us. So we use part of the Enochian that's on each tablet when we charge each direction, the 3 holy secret names of God, which some people call them. Let's go back to fire. Across the center, we have O-E-Pe, Te-A-A, Pe-Do-Ke, the 3 holy secret names. That's the line of Holy Spirit, according to some. So we do an invoking of the line of Holy Spirit in each one. So we start bringing in the Enochian with the watchtower. And we we create the great dodecahedron around us. We change the energy space of our own consciousness and the space we're in. We invoke some of the spiral letters at the center of the tablets to connect us in at one point. And when we're done with the whole procedure, what we've got is this highly charged, dense energetic space within the Enochian structure. What we've just done is we've bumped up our own consciousness manifestation to a level that we can start to interface with the Enochian.
Do you want to call it the pentatopes? Because even when you're casting the pentagrams, you're thinking of them. The reason he said pentagrams and pentagons is because in your mind, you're thinking of it as a shadow of.
One of Vincent's innovations about this is that when we are drawing a pentagram, you do it with your hand in front of you. You vibrate, so you fill your body with this vibration of the names associated with it, and you visualize. Well, the point was that in the visualization, we're actually invoking a fourth dimensional shape. If you take a pentatope, which is formed of, I think, tetrahedra, it's the walls of a pentatope are tetrahedra. And so you've got triangles. If you rotate that pentatope about its axis, you will get all of the shapes you require to make a pentagram.
Inscribed in a pentagon.
And inscribed in a pentagon. So the idea there was, okay, this is what we're doing with this higher dimensional sacred geometry when we're doing the actual work of magic or energetics, is that we're forming a fourth dimensional shape, we're rotating it and stamping out a pentagon or a pentagram, and then you begin to see the pentagram as a two-dimensional shadow of a series of fourth dimensional shapes. What we've observed is that when you are actually successfully create shapes in 4 dimensions, things happen. That's where the magic happens. That's where the energy flows. That's what you're actually doing, is you're interacting with the greater multidimensional universe or world through your mind, through these fourth dimensional shapes.
And that's the argument we always had with Vincent, was whether in fact the hypercube was a pentadodeca. And if you see a dodeca inside a dodeca, the top-down view is exactly the pentagram. And so that sort of embedding in the next dimension is embedding in the next axis of superposed spin. And then if you take that dodeca down a helix, the fifth is actually DNA itself, which is obviously more conjugate implosion. So
we get more and more connection on all different levels. It becomes fractal.
Exactly.
And as I've learned from Dan, when you have fractality, you have life.
Centripetal force.
And a lot of other things. So what we do is we do this series of rituals, which we now understand are involving the creation of higher dimensional forms that have effects, that run certain kinds of energy, that change things in our space as they are formed. And then we are ready to actually do the Enochian work. There's a series of 18 Enochian calls or keys that were transmitted to Dean Kelly through their scrying. And then beyond that, there's another one that is repeated multiple times. So you get 30. You get a very complex call, which we call the ether or ethers, and you change a single angelic name in it, and you get 30 ethers. So you do the 18 calls, which, by the way, are also connected with the elemental tablets, and one of the ways that you charge the elemental tablets, one of the procedures is using multiples of these angelic calls to activate certain portions of those tablets. So once you've got the watchtower, the energy's humming, your energy's bumped up, you're wearing the Laman, you've got the entire machine or structure around you, you're ready to start doing the calls, vibrating the calls. And I've noticed when we've done this quite a number of times, and the process seems to take over. Mm-hmm. Either it's accessing another level of your awareness that you're not normally aware of, or something within the system itself starts taking over, or maybe a combination of both. And the calls themselves start coming out in ways unforeseen, with certain rhythms and certain pitches and different things. And no two people will do them exactly alike. But you know you're doing the right thing when the energy becomes thicker and thicker until it feels like you're almost moving through jello in the room. I think Dan noticed this when we were doing just what we were doing.
We were blown away, both here in South France and also when we did this in Torino. Quite literally blown away.
When you start doing the calls, and then especially the ethers, you do all the 18 calls, then you do the 30 ethers. Ending with a silent one that Vincent discovered. The air becomes so thick you can feel it as you move through it. And when you get that effect, you know it's working. You know it's working.
And grounding and hydration and hygiene and detox all become relevant.
Dan, do you want to answer that question of Dan's about practicing it on
your own?
Yeah.
It's good to have somebody that you can work with who's done it, but or with a group. I can certainly record some of the vibrations and how I do them, and you can adapt it to what feels right to you. I don't think there's any one exactly right way to make the sounds.
There is something really. When we had a group that was getting together, I mean, it worked much better as long as there is someone there who understands what they're doing and others want to learn. We've also observed people doing things and thought like, what are you doing? Yeah.
It is good to have somebody or something as an example to at least push off from. I'll give you an example of how I do one piece of an Enochian call, and it's pretty. It's not particularly dangerous because it's pretty high level stuff that generally opens what we call the veil between this realm and the next. It's not one of these things that creates wonkiness too much. But so if you like, I'll do that bit of a call the way I do it. Now remember, this is simply the way it felt right for me to do it. Since most of these calls we are approximating in acoustic vibration, something that is probably manifest in much finer energies. It's not as much a spoken language as an energetic language. So we do the best we can. Okay. Yes, you do lose track of time, but what you want is to set aside, when you're going to do this, set aside a chunk of time. And then within that chunk of time, try to forget about time. Because once you get the watchtower open and you start in on the calls, I'm sorry, but that becomes a concept that is not relevant. An old saying is that you put yourself in a place that is not a place, in a time that has no time. Then you start getting into quantum effects like non-locality. You start saying, wait a minute, that's real. And somehow I'm interfacing with that, or I'm becoming aware of it in a way I wasn't before. So here's the opening of the veil in my version of it. O el soenuf, va o arsadi, Gohu yada balata. Elexarape komalanu tabitoem. Zoldakara eka zoldakare. Oda zoldameranu. Odo kikle kaa. Piape. Piamuel. Oda. Va-o-ai-nu.
And you can give your English. That's very nice.
So the last word Va-o-ai-nu, by the way, is truth with the capital T. And what you've just done is called on the three governors of the Tablet of Union, Elexarape, Komananu, Tabitoem, to intercede to open the veil between this realm and the celestial. So when you're reading the Enochian calls, it's a blend of pronouncing them letter by letter and lengthening them or running them so as to make it a more speakable or pronounceable language. What Enochian handbook do we recommend?
Well, one of you mentioned Vincent's books, and I think he's got some of the most advanced things in there. However, it's not really made to be, it's not really a manual. He put in there the complete Ophanic handbook, but that was specifically, I think, for the thing he and Dan and others did out in Sedona.
It's better used as a workbook when you've got somebody already teaching you, because there's stuff in it that there's really not good explanations for. Although it's a good thing to have on hand. There's also a number of things that we've put out, and something we haven't done yet that I plan on doing at some point is trying to make a decent recording of the calls, of each of the calls.
You can get good explanations, but I mean, on almost anything that you would find on Enochian, Ophanic, angelic, and all three names are used for exactly the same thing. Dee called it angelic. Enochian is because of Enoch, and
Ophanic was
the Ophanim.
Yeah, Ophanic was Vincent's term.
But you know,
and Dan.
I think it's because you're supposed to interface and try to figure things out. You know, as you change your mind, your DNA resonates with other ideas. Thanks for the website. Most of our articles, or all of our articles are on Journal of the Western Mystery Tradition. So on Alan's handout, that's the web address that's on the top of some of them.
JWMT.
Yeah.
And in addition to Journal of the Western Mystery Traditions, where Teresa, Alan, and Vincent published, those links are to Vincent's books are at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. And
the intro to that book is actually Dan put on that site, and it's by Vincent and I, but really you can tell when the style shifts. Like I wrote about the first 5 pages, and he wrote the next 15. Anyway, so
yeah. It occurs to me, and which in a way that hadn't before.
Hey, thanks, Darcy. Cool.
Yeah, it occurs to me that this class is what it's leading to is more accessible material that we could put together that would help people who want to work on it in the same way we have. So we'll certainly let Dan know, and anybody who's interested as we are able to get things together. We'll post them, or we'll create a website, or we'll do something. Put it on Dan's site.
What we'll do, Alan, is we'll put this film at goldenmean.info/Ophanim at the top, along with the links to this new material, and gradually try to network the various groups around who would like to synergize. For example, a pretty disciplined Ophanic working group was working in Torino, and we're considering hoping to get something going here in South France with the help of Terry and Alan and other groups. And so we'll start the networking there with this material.
Dan, there is someone in Texas who is real interested in doing that, unless you are unless you were in Prague with us this summer. But that wasn't you, was it?
Well, that's good to know.
Let me see if I can find out the name of that person. But it would be pretty cool to have a kind of working group.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and I would be loath to spread this around if I thought people were going to be doing this in a too offhand a manner, or not with the the right intent, and we're just going to mess around. But if people are serious and would like to see where this leads, would like to see what the effects are, I think that'd be a great idea. It seems to me that the source of the Enochian material, whoever they may be, who we are calling the Ophanim, and we have ideas about, but I'm not sure any of us know precisely all of the aspects of their nature or who they are. But it seemed to me that they gave this to us so that we use it in such a way that it catalyzes expanded awareness. And so if you've got people who are using it in the right spirit and openness in different places around the world, that I think that couldn't do anything but help.
It's a beautiful thing, a disciplined group work, and also the astral hygiene aspect, which is that the same way a group can prepare to lucid dream together, to function as a soul group, to take their plasma cocoon through the heart of the sun, that everyone must basically weep for one another so they can feel each other's pain well enough to become one as a plasma body. So gradually that kind of discipline evolves, as it did with the
expanded, the fact that you are becoming aware of the collective is that you feel the pain of others. Mm-hmm. That whole idea of I am another yourself. We are all different facets of one great self, in a sense.
And you have to be real careful not to
process. That Alan and Terry are here because they actually have the craftsmanship, the academic skill, the mechanics to know how to put this together. So now we can put some groups together and do more networking, and this is a good start.
Absolutely. It sounds really good. And by the way, yes, I do think Vincent would like this. As a matter of fact, on occasion, maybe I'm a little nuts, but I guess a lot of us are. But I feel him around every now and then.
I feel him around now.
And I think he's present. I mean, I think he is. And I can't imagine a universe without Vincent. He is such a good buddy, and he had so many things that we've learned from. We'd have a good time with him, and he was the best storyteller I ever met in my life. He was so much fun. And so I think he is here, and I think in whatever way he's able to interact, he's helping along, We wouldn't be able to understand this in the way that we do if it hadn't been for him. Well, and for Dan as well. Well, and thank you, Dan.
Yeah, you two are so synchronous. By the way, Dan Kaplan has said something about the Hopi Pueblo. We have an academic book I'm working on is with some friends on the Zuni Pueblo. They were up here to marry some friends of ours several years ago, so they came over to our house and came in to our Enochian temple, and I was curious what they would think, and it was immediately
they recognized it as a sacred space. And had just as much respect for it as they would ask for respect for their own sacred spaces. I was delighted.
And maybe just as with a view toward future projects, I noticed when Terry and Alan arrived here in South France to lead the ritual that was here, it was short but amazingly powerful, that they arrived with quite elaborate preparations. They had prepared all the tablets, all the materials. So there's a whole kind of course that goes with assembling the materials, the cards, the layouts, the symbols, the tables.
Yeah, there's something that would be hard to duplicate in this online format. That if we can be in the same place with some people at some time, is that you do the show and tell with all the parts, and then you put it together, and it's part of the process to put it together. Then we do the ritual together. We do the full stack. We do the watchtower. and the energy starts to pump, and then you start working with that together as a group of people, and everybody gets charged. I remember seeing Dan's hair stand on end.
Yeah.
Dan is such a lightning rod for higher energies.
Yeah, too much Kundalini, definitely. But it's sort of like, remember in the movie Stargate, they actually use the Ophanim letters. So this is a real Stargate.
Oh yeah. Oh, you can sense it, you know. And so it's very instructive to actually be there with it. But you know, those who can't get together with us or someone like us, we can see about getting as much as we can in recorded format or online, so that you can have something to work with.
And there was, by the way, Joseph, what you were saying about people doing it concurrently, since Dan put this channeling of Alan's online, there was something in there about that, about basically it being a carrier wave and intermediates of the Ophanim stabilizing the geometric structure of the Earth. That's a much longer discussion about sort of what he's doing with the.
There appears to be levels and levels and levels of things going on, and it's all interconnected. The stuff that Dan's doing with Fractal U, and all of his ideas about the scientific explanations for and understandings of, you know, mysticism and magic and esotericism, and spreading that, and the different things that are happening, like Paul Harris, his alchemy, the Theraphi device that Paul and Dan and others have worked on, the alchemy conference in Prague, all these different things seem to be parts of a greater whole that's happening right now. And I think the greatest significance of this is that we're a part of the unfolding of a new level of human understanding.
By the way, Dan, just a side, but it would be really cool to do the Theraphi device in a running Enochian temple.
I'd love
That's
to see
just
that.
like, it's an energy junkie's dream, but beyond that, I mean,
I'd like to
just-
see one
We'll
more.
set that intent for next summer. Good plan. And remember that the Aboriginals knew that if you weren't communicating with ancestors, you weren't acting on the immortal plan. And communication with ancestors is a plasma intelligence, just like angelic. And when plasma domain letters conjugate, they start the implosion which draws them in. So it is the coconut radio to not just angels, but ancestor memories. So we really need this for our collective survival.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. One last slide here. And what does this have to do with Enochian? Well, what it has to do with is that I seem to have gotten in touch with 30 years ago some of these intermediary intelligences. I won't go into a lot of detail about it. People already think I'm crazy enough. But before I knew anything, before I'd ever heard of Enochian or John D. and Edward Kelly, oddly enough, when I was in my very early 20s, I had a series of very powerful experiences. And in one of them, I was instructed how to put together a device from things that I had on hand that I was told would enable me to communicate more easily. What you see in front of you is what I was instructed to assemble. They're quartz crystals, there are octahedral fluorites, and then there are these two fluorites near the front. There's a purple cluster, quartz cluster out of a piece of a geode. And there's a specific protocol for using it. Now, about the time that I had already been investigating Enochian, I'd had this for years, and that I had, so I was starting to try to figure out what is going on when I'm using these things. I noticed that a shape would happen whenever I activated this. There would be a shape that I saw in like lines of golden light around me. That's how I visualized it. That's how I saw it. It was rotating with this at the center. I later found out that that was probably a 24 cell. So the odd thing is that without having any idea about the emerald modem of the tablet of Malvage and the Enochian system, I'd been instructed to put something together that did something somewhat similar. So I now have this in my Enochian temple. And when we've set everything up and gotten everything running, we crank this one up too.
We have some moldavite in there now.
Yeah, we've also got some moldavite from the Czech Republic, which is meteoric glass that you find all over northern Bohemia from a huge meteorite strike God knows how long ago. And we were talking about that earlier as having to do with some of the alchemy that Edward Kelly and John P. were doing.
Yes, it said that the rose-like shape of the magnetic map of Prague is because it's a meteoritic caldera, and that glass meteorite, like the Kaba stone, which became the philosopher's stone projected powder, became the high dielectric moldavite. So basically implosive capacitance.
So what you get, if anybody's interested, briefly, very brief, because we're going to have to wind up here, is that those quartz shafts in there become the quartz shafts in here seem to function as energy collectors. I project as much energy as I'm capable of. If you're in a functioning Enochian temple, you don't have to work at that. And they begin to glow, or at least in my mind's eye, I see them glowing. Then the energy is taken by these three fluorides and focused together. These two focus each of these banks into the center one, and a shaft of energy goes up into this large one. And I see it expand, and it was very odd. Before I ever saw my first Sri Yantra, this thing would expand out into this shape and then go back when it activated. Well, it turns out that what I was seeing was the Sri Yantra, which is odd, which is kind of odd. And then when everything is buzzing, a shaft of light, purple, I see it as purple, goes straight up from this, up above the earth, up, fixing where we are, up above the earth. And it acts like an antenna. It seems to potentiate certain kinds of communication and certain kinds of energy work. And I used that before I knew anything about Enochian for things like that. And since we've had an Enochian temple, they work together synergistically. You don't have to have one of these, but the fact that I did helped me quite a bit. So we've just got a few more minutes, so I thought maybe what I would end with, let me get a good, well, actually that's a good visual there. Where's Terry, where's the channel?
Oh,
We have a link. There's a link to the channeling here too.
Well, we've got it on our computer.
okay,
Okay, here we go. So what I wanted to do was conclude with the last true. I did read at the very beginning some of this stuff. Well, here's the last two paragraphs from that, which seems to me to have a very strong connection with all this stuff we've been talking about tonight. And it was part of a message. Yeah. And here
the link
it
is there.
Right. There is a greater truth than that is obvious. We were with you before the beginning, and we will be with you at the conclusion of the great circle, the spiral that is always. And whenever you exist within that spiral, we are. Well, we are manifestations of your highest and truest selfhood, for which all of you exists at the center of your reality, in the center of your space in the universe, and about which all things spiral around. Health and healing, protection, these are flowing to you. Allow them to flow through you. Protection and safety, things about you and within you. We are always with you. And as you touch others, as you speak to others, as you interact with others, we touch and speak and interact through you. We are all part of the same individual, indivisible life. Through you and many others like you all over the world, here and now, our essential long wavelength selfhood, awareness, and purpose are manifest. That which you call God the highest. Ia, Ida, Ia, Da. Are there any questions before we're done?
Thank you for that, Alan. It was beautiful.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for allowing me to share it.
And there are requests that for your help in leading rituals in other locations. So let's set up communication for that. In fact, a way for people to communicate with you. Do you want to share an email or a contact for people who have requests for coordinating ritual? Because Alan really has that skill.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone who was present for this for being here.
Thanks, Dan, for setting it up.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Dan. For
Yeah, well,
this forum for all of you.
and thank you for thanking. But let's use this wonderful momentum now to plant a renewed seed that we get to work collectively and individually to invoke our angelic presences and do the homework and take the next step. So we'll work to organize more groups and share more information, work with that website. We'll put this film up in the links, and let's just visualize, everyone, stay in touch. There will be a next step.
Oh, yes. And if people want to get in touch with us, Terry and me, if it's okay with you, Dan, if they could let you know they're trying to get in touch if they have trouble.
Or we can type in, here, I'll type in.
Well, Terry, okay, type in something, Terry, see if we put an email address at least.
Okay, so this is mine, and Alan's being coy because neither of us are the best about answering email.
Well, I'll do I'll
Okay,
try to.
maybe
Okay,
that's-
mine is.
Yeah, so there's a contact. That's good. And of course, mine is info@fractalfield.com. So either way, and there's Alan's, there's a Larry in there. So we have the.
You'll find me sometimes in online and other places under the name Alarian, which is the name I go by in the local magical community around here.
Yes.
But Alan is a part of Alarian. Alan's included in Alarian. So, same person.
Yes, let's consider a Facebook group. In fact, Joseph, thanks for offering. Maybe you could start a Facebook group, Joseph, and we'll use that. I'll put all this information from tonight at goldenmean.info/Ophanim along with this new video, and then we'll use that maybe to launch that Facebook group. And we'll have the next step. The group forms, the soul group through the heart of the sun. It's all good.
That sounds great. Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Had a good time.
Blessings. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, everybody. Blessings and sweet dreams. Let's dream about angels tonight.
Yes. Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good. See you guys.
Bye-bye. Bye. I'm turning off the recording now.